Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new episode of Great Books in 10 Minutes. By the end of this video, you will learn everything about the second play from the Oresteia Trilogy by Aeschylus, The Libation Bearers. The play opens at the tomb of Agamemnon in Mycenae. Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, stands before the tomb and addresses Hermes, the god of the underworld, beseeching him to aid in his return from exile and the avenging of his father's murder. Orestes brings offerings to the grave, including locks of his own hair, as a sign of mourning and dedication. A bit later, the chorus of women adorned in mourning garb enters carrying libations to be offered at Agamemnon's tomb. They lament the sorrows that have befallen their royal house, recounting the ominous dreams and divine portents that foretold the wrath of the dead against their slayers. The chorus further expresses the grief and turmoil that has consumed the palace, with the once mighty reputation of the house now diminished and a sense of dread and foreboding pervading the household. They speak of the stain of blood that cannot be washed away and the lingering presence of the goddess of mischief, who brings ruin upon the sinners. The ensemble continues its lament, describing the irreversible nature of the crime committed and the inability to cleanse the land of the spilled blood. They draw parallels between the fate of Troy and their own, mourning the loss of freedom and the need to submit to the will of their new masters while concealing their inner turmoil and bitterness. Electra, the daughter of Agamemnon, joins the chorus and questions how she should offer the libations to her father's grave. Torn between revealing the truth that the offerings come from her mother, the murderer, or concealing it and invoking a curse upon the perpetrators. She asks the chorus for counsel, acknowledging their shared grief and hatred. The chorus advises Electra to speak solemn words as she pours the libations, invoking the names of those who loved Agamemnon, including Electra herself and any others who remain loyal to his memory. Electra follows the chorus's guidance, addressing Hermes and the underworld deities, calling upon her father to hear her prayer and restore his children to their rightful place in the household, while also praying for the downfall of their enemies. Electra continues her prayer, asking for justice to prevail and for the slayers to be punished in turn as she pours the libations onto the grave. She entreats the gods and the earth to aid in her quest for vengeance. The chorus then leads a mourning dirge lamenting Agamemnon's fate and calling for a champion to arise and deliver their home, someone with the might of Ares to bend the bow and slay their foes. Electra notices a lock of hair on the tomb, and the ensemble questions whether it could be a secret offering from Orestes, who remains in exile. Electra is filled with both hope and sorrow, torn between the possibility of her brother's return and the realization that he may never dare to come home. Electra examines the lock of hair, comparing it to her own and those of her family, and expressing her anguish over the uncertainty of its origin. She hopes that it could be a sign from Orestes, but she fears it may be a cruel taunt from her mother, the murderous queen. Electra's soul is racked with the turmoil of conflicting emotions as she wavers between despair and the faint glimmer of hope for the restoration of her family's fortunes. At this moment, Orestes suddenly approaches Electra and reveals his true identity to her, explaining that he is the one she has been longing for, her brother Orestes. At first, Electra is skeptical, but Orestes provides compelling evidence, including the lock of hair he had placed on their father's tomb and the robe she had woven. Electra is overjoyed to be reunited with her beloved brother, and they pledge to work together to reclaim their father's halls and avenge his murder. Orestes and Electra pray to Zeus, asking for the divine intervention to aid them in their quest for justice. They wail their status as orphans, stripped of their home and inheritance, and plead with the gods to not abandon the children of the great Agamemnon. The chorus warns them to be cautious, as their words could be overheard by their enemies. Orestes declares his unwavering resolve to carry out the vengeance commanded by the oracle of Apollo. He recounts the dire warnings the god had issued, threatening him with horrific consequences if he failed to punish those who had slain his father. Orestes sees this as a sacred duty, driven not only by the divine mandate, but also by his own personal grief and the desire to restore his family's honor and wealth. The chorus invokes the mighty fates, calling upon them to grant justice to those who have been wronged. They echo the sentiment that those who have taken up the sword must perish by the sword, a timeless principle of retribution. Orestes and Electra join the chorus in mourning the shameful manner in which their father was killed and buried, vowing to avenge his dishonor. The brother and sister express their grief over the tragedy that has befallen their family, wishing that Agamemnon had met a glorious death in battle rather than being slain in his own home. The ensemble acknowledges the depth of their sorrow but reminds them that the gods may still turn their fortunes around and restore their rightful place in the royal household. Orestes and Electra, fervently invoking the underworld gods, plead for assistance in their quest for vengeance. Recalling their father's brutal murder, they implore his spirit to rise up in support of their cause, vowing to honor him with proper rites once justice is served. The chorus echoes their impassioned plea, acknowledging the relentless cycle of blood and retribution that shadows the royal house, expressing both fear and awe at the siblings' bold appeal to the forces of the underworld. Electra makes a final heartfelt plea to her father's ghost, likening the children to the buoyant corks that keep a submerged net afloat, preserving his memory and legacy. She implores him to heed their cries and lend his strength to their cause. The chorus concludes by urging Orestes and Electra to take hold of their fortunes and act upon their resolute intentions. Orestes ponders the meaning behind Clytemnestra's decision to send offerings to Agamemnon's tomb, wondering if it is a sign of remorse or merely a futile attempt to atone for her crime. The chorus reveals that the queen had a disturbing dream, in which she gave birth to a serpent that then suckled her breast and drew blood, causing her to cry out in alarm. Orestes interprets the dream as a foreboding sign, signifying that he, like the serpent, will rise up to avenge his father's murder. The young prince then invokes the powers of the earth and his father's grave, asking them to grant fulfillment to Clytemnestra's ominous dream. He further elaborates on his interpretation, seeing himself as the serpent that will slay the mother who betrayed and killed his father. Next, Orestes outlines his plan to infiltrate the palace, disguised as a stranger, and confront his mother's lover and the co-conspirator in Agamemnon's murder, Aeschylus, before striking him down with his sword. He then urges Electra to prepare the household for the impending retribution. The chorus reflects on the extraordinary and fearsome things that exist in the world, but notes that the most dreadful of all is the passionate, unrestrained nature within the human soul. They recount tales of famous women driven by love, hate, and despair who have committed heinous acts. The chorus expresses the belief that these crimes, no matter how ancient, cannot be forgotten or overlooked, and that justice and fate will eventually exact their due retribution. Orestes and his friend, disguised as travelers, arrive at the palace gates and knock, calling for someone to open the doors. A slave emerges and questions their identity and purpose, to which Orestes responds that they have important news to deliver to those in authority within the household, be it the queen or a man of standing. He urges the slave to summon someone of consequence, as it is improper for a man to speak to a servant when a master is present. Clytemnestra emerges from the palace and warmly welcomes the two strangers, offering them the hospitality of the household, including a warm bath, comfortable accommodations, and courteous attention. Orestes, still in disguise, then reveals the news he has brought, that Orestes, Clytemnestra's own son, has died. Clytemnestra is devastated, mourning the loss of the one who was meant to avenge the wrongs done to their family and restore the household's fortunes. On the other side, the chorus eagerly awaits the news of Orestes' victory, invoking the earth and the tomb of Agamemnon to aid in the impending retribution. They are then joined by the nurse Achilles, who has been sent by Clytemnestra to summon Aegisthus, unaware of the true nature of the visitor's intent. Sensing the turning of the tide, the chorus urges Achilles to convey the news to Aegisthus in a manner that will lull him into a false sense of security, rather than warning him of the danger. The chorus questions Achilles about the instructions Clytemnestra has given regarding Aegisthus' arrival, and the nurse reveals that Clytemnestra has asked her lover to bring armed guards with him. The chorus, however, advises Achilles to tell the man to come alone, as the news is good, and there is no need for him to be wary. Achilles, who is upset over the death of Orestes, agrees to follow the chorus's guidance, hoping that the gods will turn the tide in their favor. The ensemble then fervently prays to Zeus, beseeching the king of the gods to aid Orestes in his righteous quest for vengeance and the restoration of his rightful place in the household. They invoke the image of Orestes as a young foal harnessed to the chariot of destiny, urging Zeus to guide him safely to the finish line. The chorus also calls upon the gods who dwell within the palace to lend their power to the endeavor, so that the cycle of bloodshed may finally be broken and the family's honor and freedom be reclaimed. They express hope that Hermes, the messenger of the gods, will aid in revealing the truth and guiding the course of events. Next, Aegisthus enters, having heard the rumors of Orestes' death. He questions the chorus, seeking to verify the truth of this news, as he is wary of being deceived. The ensemble, however, advises him to go and question the strangers himself, as first-hand accounts are more reliable than second-hand reports. A sudden cry is heard from within the palace, prompting the chorus to speculate that the deed has been carried out. A slave then rushes out, wailing the death of Aegisthus and calling for aid, but realizing that it is too late. The slave also suggests that Clytemnestra, the queen, may be in danger as well. Clytemnestra emerges, questioning the commotion. Orestes then confronts her, declaring that he will slay her as he did Aegisthus, her lover. Clytemnestra pleads with Orestes, reminding him of the nurturing care she gave him as a child. But Orestes is resolute, arguing that she must face the consequences of her actions in murdering his father Agamemnon. Orestes is torn as his mother continues to appeal to him, invoking their familial bond. Pylades, Orestes' companion, reminds him of the divine command he received to avenge his father's death, urging him to choose the wrath of the gods over the pleas of his mother. Ultimately, Orestes decides to follow through with the deed, driving Clytemnestra before him to slay her alongside Aegisthus. The chorus laments the double tragedy of the deaths, but acknowledges that Orestes, driven by fate, has now completed the cycle of vengeance that has plagued the royal house. They celebrate the restoration of the rightful heir to the throne and the liberation of the household from the corrupt rule of Clytemnestra and her lover. The ensemble expresses hope that justice and the gods will now guide the family towards a brighter future, cleansing the palace of its past sins and ushering in a new era of prosperity and freedom. Orestes stands over the bodies of Aegisthus and Clytemnestra, holding the sword and robe used to slay his father, Agamemnon. Orestes mourns the twofold tyranny that has plagued his household, and he calls upon the sun god to witness the justice of his actions in killing his mother, who plotted against his father. The young prince grapples with the conflicted emotions of his deed, expressing both triumph and anguish. He then acknowledges that the end he faces is uncertain, as his mind is now overcome by madness. He declares that he rightfully slew his mother, who had murdered his father, and that the oracle of Apollo had foretold this act. Orestes now seeks refuge at the shrine of Apollo, begging the Argives to bear witness to the fateful circumstances that have led him to this point. He weeps that he must depart as a banished wanderer. At the end of the second play, the chorus expresses empathy for Orestes, acknowledging the great victory he has achieved in vanquishing the serpents' heads. However, they recognize that the storm of divine woe continues to ravage the royal house, with this latest act serving as the third devastating blow. The ensemble wonders anxiously where the winds of doom will blow next, as the family's tragic cycle remains unbroken. Very well, my friends, I trust you found my summary of the second play of the Oresteia cycle enjoyable. Your support is crucial in helping me to create further episodes. To contribute, kindly consider becoming a member, liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. For those inclined to donate, secure links are provided in the description box. Thank you sincerely, and see you in the next episode.